Hi everyone, and welcome back to Building Zion. I'm Marlene, and this is another little gospel pearl. Now, before I get started, I do want to make the point that this is not a come follow me study. It is little gospel pearls, things that I found interesting while studying that I want to pass on and share to you. So it might come from Come Follow Me, it might come from a general conference talk, a talk from BYU or Ensign College. It might come from something I read in the Liahona, any number of places. Okay, so to get started, let's come over to the Gospel Library app and we'll come to Come Follow Me, July, and we're going to click on July 6th through 12th. And this is looking at 2 Kings 2 through 7. All right, so in this lesson, we're learning about the prophet Elisha. And Elisha, we learn from the Come Follow Me lesson that there aren't a lot of his teachings in here, but we do learn a lot about his miracles. And we see many ways in which he paralleled Christ. And we're going to talk about one way in specific that he paralleled Christ. Now we're also learning about Nahum, who was captain of the guard for the king of Syria. So let's go back. We're going to go to Kings chapter 5 and learn a little bit about Nahum and what was going on with Elisha here. So verse 1. Now Nahum, captain of the host of the king of Syria, was a great man with his master and honorable. Because of him the Lord had given deliverance unto Syria, and was also a mighty man in valor, but he was a leper. So we're seeing here immediately that Nahum was a good guy. He was honorable. He was a mighty man of valor, and so the Lord had blessed Syria much because of him. But he was also a leper, and that came with a lot of stigmas at the time, stigmas that implied that he was not really a great person. But then we have in verse 2, and the Syrians had gone out by companies and had brought away captive out of the land of Israel a little maid, and she waited on Nahum's wife. So the little maid then says to her mistress, Would God my Lord were with the prophet that is in Samaria, for he would recover him of his leprosy. So his wife went and told Nahum, and there began a correspondence between Nahum and the king of Syria, sending a letter over to the king of Israel, and it gets to Elisha. There's, some things that happen there. And Elisha says, yes, send him to me that he may know that there is a prophet in Israel. So then verse 9, so Nahum came with his horses and with his chariot and stood at the door of the house of Elisha. And Elisha sent a messenger unto him, saying, Go and wash in Jordan 7 times, and thy flesh shall come again to thee, and thou shalt be clean. So he was commanded by the servant of Elisha, who didn't go out to him. Elisha stayed behind. And Nahum felt offended by this, upset. He said, why doesn't this prophet come out and stand and call on the name of the Lord his God and strike his hand over the place and recover the leper? So immediately we're seeing that Nahum does not recognize the God of Israel as the one true God. He still sees it as another God. And at this time, there are lots of gods that people in all kinds of different lands worship. And so Nahum is trying out this God. Not only that, but he was told to go wash in the Jordan River. And he says that the Jordan River is more dirty than the rivers of Damascus. So why would I want to go over to that river when I could go to my own rivers? Then in 13, and a servant came near and spake unto him and said, My father, if the prophet had bid thee do some great thing, wouldst thou not have done it? How much rather then when he said unto thee, Wash and be clean? So the servant is saying, if the prophet himself had come out and told you, wouldn't you have gone down to the river? So what's the difference if it's just a servant that came out and told you? So you should still go and do it. So then Nahum in verse 14 went down and dipped himself 7 times in Jordan, according to the saying of the man of God, and his flesh came again like unto the flesh of a little child, and he was clean. So first of all, I want to point out, not only is Nahum a man of valor and honor, but he is also a man of humility. Yes, he was annoyed, he was upset that Elisha didn't come out to him. That gave him offense. But he does have a lot of humility. One, because when the little maid told his wife that he could be healed by this prophet in Israel, he followed through. He's like, okay, let's go give it a try. And then 2, whenever his servant came to him and said, look, if it was the prophet, wouldn't you have done it? He said, okay, I will go and do it. So that takes a lot of humility, especially for someone who is in a lot of power, a position of high power, like he was. Captain of the guard was a position of power. And so he went and did it, and he was healed. Okay, now looking back at verse 15, it says, and he returned to the man of God, and he and all his company, and came and stood before him. And he said, behold, now I know that there is no God in all the earth but in Israel. Now therefore, I pray thee, take a blessing of thy servant. And he said, as the Lord liveth, before whom I stand, I will receive none. And he urged him to take it, but he refused. So this is Nahum returning, offering payment for being healed. And Elisha says, I will not take it. And he refuses him twice. But here we are. Let's look now at what the parallel between Elisha and Christ is. Christ was always giving credit and pointing up to his Father. He always was turning everyone back to God the Father. And the same thing is happening here. Elisha was pointing Nahum back to God the Father and not to himself. Yes, he said that if Nahum comes down to Israel, he will know that there is a prophet in Israel, which is a good thing to know that there is a prophet of God in Israel. But the more important thing is that Nahum know that God, the God of Israel, is God and is the one and only God. And so when Elisha didn't come out and he sent his servant out, this was immediately pointing to God and not to himself. The miracle was not about himself. It wasn't about Elisha the prophet. It was about Nahum recognizing the power of God and recognizing where the miracle came from. So that whenever he was healed and he returned, he said, I now know that there is only one God, and it is the God of Israel. And then the next thing that happens, this is a big lesson in priestcraft, or rather how to not do priestcraft. A prophet, his job is to always point back to God the Father or Jesus Christ. But we know that Jesus Christ was always pointing to God the Father, not himself. And so Elisha was not going to take credit for it. He wasn't going to take payment. He was giving honor back to God the Father, that this was God's miracle and it was God's work. The same thing can happen whether you're taking payment or just receiving honor and praise or recognition for the teaching or the miracle and saying, yes, this is my teaching, or yes, this miracle was done at my hands, rather than pointing back to Heavenly Father. That he's the one that gave this miracle. He's the one that provided the teaching. However, let's go back down to verse 20. It says, but Gehazi, the servant of Elisha, so we're assuming this is the same servant that came out and spoke to Nahum originally. But Gehazi, the servant of Elisha, the man of God, said, behold, my master hath spared Nahum the Syrian, in not receiving at his hands that which he brought. But as the Lord liveth, I will run after him and take somewhat of him. So Gehazi followed after Nahum, and he ended up taking with him Let's see, he took 2 talents of silver and 2 bags with 2 changes of garments and laid them upon 2 of his servants, and they bared them before him. And then they returned. Then in verse 25, Gehazi, he stood before his master, and Elisha said unto him, Whence comest thou, Gehazi? And he said, Thy servant went no whither. So not only did Gehazi go and chase after Nahum and take payment, but then he also just lied to Elisha. And then in verse 26, and he said unto him, so Elisha says unto Gehazi, Went not my heart with thee, when the man turned again from his chariot to meet thee? Is it a time to receive money and to receive garments and olive vineyards and sheep and oxen and manservants and maidservants? The leprosy, therefore, of Nahum shall cleave unto thee and unto thy seed for forever. And he went out from his presence a leper as white as snow. So Gehazi was cursed. He not only became a leper himself, but it said that all of his posterity forever would be lepers. Now, thinking about this scientifically, you might say, there's a good chance that the things that Nahum had that disease on them, had the leprosy disease on them. And so it kind of would make sense that Gehazi would contract the disease. And therefore it would make sense that Elisha wouldn't want anything, payment from him. But it really wasn't about not getting leprosy. It was about not accepting praise and honor for something that wasn't yours. It was from God and not from Elisha, not from Gehazi. And so even though Gehazi became a leper, there was a curse that remained now on his posterity. And I do wonder, it does make me think, does Gehazi still have any more posterity that are alive? That would be very interesting to find out. I don't know. His line might have ended. That's very sad. It's a super sad situation, but something that does make me think. Okay, so in the end, our big takeaway here is that, one, I think Nahum was a good man. He was humble. But also, more than that, is that Elisha was paralleling Christ and Christ's mission in many ways, and the big way is that he was doing exactly what a prophet is supposed to do. Always point everyone to Christ and to Heavenly Father. And in the end, it was Nahum that knew who God the Father really was and who the true God was. And that is what the job of every prophet should do. It's always about God and not about themselves. All right, everyone, thank you for joining me. We'll see you next time. Bye.